The room shimmered with gold and crystal as the city's elite gathered under the grand chandeliers of the Crownwell estate. It was the kind of gala where everyone knew everyone, or at least pretended to. The guest list was tightly curated, every name attached to fame, fortune, or influence. So when she walked in, alone, with no entourage and a dress that looked vintage rather than designer, people noticed, but not in a good way. Whispers spread like wildfire. Who was she? A server. Who got lost? Someone's assistant trying too hard? The other guests barely hid their judgment. Some sneered, others ignored her completely. Cameras didn't follow her. Socialites didn't offer smiles. In their eyes, she didn't belong. She moved gracefully, almost as if untouched by the noise around her. But behind her calm eyes, she felt every glance, every quiet insult. She made her way to a corner table, far from the dance floor and closer to the shadows. Still, there was something about her, something different. A quiet confidence, a poise that didn't quite match the assumptions being made about her. As the evening wore on, she stayed quiet, observing, sipping her drink with the elegance of someone who had attended far grander gatherings than this one. And then, the energy in the room shifted. A ripple of excitement spread from the entrance. Security tightened. Phones were discreetly pulled out. Even the most composed guests straightened their posture. The royal family had arrived. Yes, those royals, the ones who rarely attended public events, let alone private ones. Everyone turned to watch them enter, graceful, powerful, untouchable. But what happened next was something no one could have predicted. As the royals moved through the crowd, nodding politely and exchanging pleasantries, their eyes searched the room, and then locked onto her. In a moment that silenced the entire ballroom, the queen herself walked straight past the celebrities, the politicians, the billionaires, and stopped at the table in the corner. The girl stood up slowly, calmly. No, surprise in her eyes. And then something happened that made jaws drop and cameras fall from frozen hands. Because suddenly, this so-called nobody wasn't invisible anymore. But who was she really, and what secret connected her to royalty? You'll want to hear the rest. Gasps echoed softly through the ballroom as the queen leaned in, not just to speak, but to embrace her. The photographers hesitated, unsure if they were allowed to capture what looked like a deeply personal moment. And still, no one knew who she was. Just moments ago, the same crowd had dismissed her. Now they stood frozen, watching as royalty acknowledged her with the kind of warmth that wasn't extended to anyone else in the room. She said nothing, just smiled gently, exchanging a few quiet words with the queen. Her expression remained calm, yet there was a flicker in her eyes, like she'd been waiting for this. No one around them could hear what was said, but the queen's nods, the way she reached for her hand again before leaving, none of that could be faked. This wasn't a coincidence. This was history, or maybe unfinished history. After the royal family moved on. The silence didn't lift. Whispers began again, this time in confusion instead of judgment. Is she royalty? Was she adopted? Why haven't we heard of her? People started pulling out their phones, trying to identify her. But nothing came up. No name, no records. It was like she didn't exist. And that made her presence even more unsettling for the ones who claimed to know everyone. But behind her quiet smile was a story, one that had never been told in public. She had grown up far from ballrooms and palaces, a quiet life in the countryside, raised by an elderly woman who ran a small bookshop. She had never talked about her past. Even to those closest to her childhood was always a blank chapter. The woman who raised her said she had found her wrapped in a faded blanket on the steps of the shop. No note, no name. Just a bracelet, with a symbol, a crown, carved into a small stone. That bracelet, worn under her sleeve tonight, had never left her wrist. As the night moved on and people tried to return to their conversations, they couldn't stop glancing back at her. She wasn't mingling, she wasn't explaining anything, and she wasn't trying to be noticed. But one thing was clear now: she hadn't come by mistake. She'd come for a reason. And whatever that reason was, it was just beginning to unfold. She stayed at the edge of the ballroom, untouched by the sudden spotlight. Though people whispered and stared, no one dared to approach her. Not yet. But someone was watching closely. Lord Everett, a longtime advisor to the royal family, known for his cold charm and ruthless attention to details. He leaned over to a security officer and whispered something. The officer nodded and quietly stepped out of the room. Across the hall, Lady Celeste, a fashion heiress with deep ties to the palace, clutched her champagne a little too tightly. Her carefully rehearsed night was falling apart. She had been expecting the Queen's attention tonight. Rumor had it she was next in line for a Royal Foundation partnership, until she appeared. Celeste's eyes narrowed. She didn't believe in coincidences, especially not ones that came wearing mystery like perfume. Meanwhile, in a quiet hallway behind the gala, a young staff member named Jacob opened a locked drawer in the security office. He had seen the girl before. Not in person, but in an old photo buried in one of the Queen's private archives. It was a scanned image with no name, only a handwritten note. "Return when it's time." He stared at the girl in the photo and then at the live footage on the screen. Same face, same eyes. But how? Back in the ballroom, she moved toward the garden quietly, as if guided by instinct. The cool night air brushed against her skin as she stepped into the moonlight, the bracelet on her wrist catching a faint silver glow. She stood still, eyes scanning the dark hedges. She wasn't here to socialize. She was here for something specific. Or someone. Inside, the Queen sat in a private lounge with her chief of staff. "She came," the Queen whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "After all these years." Her voice carried both relief and concern. "They'll try to stop her. Should I alert the others?" the chief asked gently. The Queen shook her head. "No, not yet. Let them make their moves." Because this was more than just a girl walking into a gala. This was the return of a truth long buried, one that could challenge the line of succession, reveal royal secrets, and change the balance of power within the monarchy. And not everyone would welcome that. Some would do anything to keep the past buried, even if it meant stopping her. The garden was almost too quiet, the kind of silence that didn't feel peaceful, but watchful. She stood still, heart calm, but alert, as if she knew something was coming. A few soft footsteps crunched the gravel behind her. She turned slightly but didn't flinch. It was Jacob, the staff member from the security room. He looked nervous, like he'd crossed a line just by approaching her. "I think I've seen you before," he said, voice low. "In a photo. From the palace records." She didn't look surprised. "Then you know I'm not here by accident." Jacob hesitated, then pulled something from his pocket. It was a copy of that old photograph, now slightly crumpled. This image. The Queen kept it hidden. No one's supposed to know. "She kept it because she knew the truth would need protection," she said softly, "and now it needs to come out." From the shadows, someone watched them, Lord Everett. He was no longer just curious. He looked concerned. He slipped back into the ballroom, headed straight for the Queen's security chief. "We have a situation," he said. "She's making contact. We need to contain this before it spreads, the eye." Queen, meanwhile, stood in front of a large portrait hanging in the lounge, a painting of her late sister. Few people ever mentioned her. Officially, she had died young, never married, no children. But that wasn't the full story. And tonight, the truth her family had kept hidden for decades was walking freely through their gala. Back outside, a sleek, black car pulled up at the rear entrance. Two men in discreet suits stepped out, checking their surroundings. Not palace guards. Private. Hired. Someone had called in outside help, and they weren't here to talk. Jacob noticed them first through a side gate. His stomach dropped. "We have to move," he whispered to her. "Now." She nodded, calm, prepared. As if she knew this part was coming too. Inside, the tension hit a boiling point. Guests were starting to feel the shift, the way staff moved faster, the security presence growing tighter. Even Lady Celeste had noticed. Her voice dropped to a whisper as she spoke to her father, a powerful donor with military ties. "She's not just a guest," she muttered. "She's a threat to everything they've built." And in that moment, one truth became painfully clear. This wasn't just a royal reunion, it was a reckoning. And before the night was over, someone would try to silence it. Just as Jacob led her through the back corridor of the estate, the soft chime of the ballroom's antique clock echoed through the halls. It was midnight, the moment everything began to shift. They turned a corner, thinking they were unseen, but someone was already waiting. A woman in a dark green dress stepped out of the shadows. Lady Celeste. Her expression was sharp, unreadable. "You should have stayed away," she said, eyes locked on the girl. "This isn't your world anymore." "I never left it," the girl replied, voice steady. "They just chose to erase me from it." Celeste laughed quietly, though there was no humor in it. "You think walking in here changes anything? They'll bury the truth again, just like they did before." Her voice lowered. "I should know. I helped them do it." Jacob stared, confused. "You? What are you talking about?" Celeste looked at him, something almost like regret in her eyes. "She's not the first to come looking for answers," she said. "Years ago, someone else tried. A woman. Her mother." The girl froze. "You knew her?" "I knew of her," Celeste said. "She came too close. She was silenced before she could say anything, and the palace never spoke of her again." The hallway seemed colder suddenly, tighter. The girl's breath caught in her throat. For years, all she had were questions. About the bracelet, the woman who raised her, the whispers in her dreams. But this was the first real thread. Before she could respond, a commotion erupted near the service doors. Voices, urgent and clipped. Jacob quickly checked his phone. A message flashed across the screen from a palace insider. "They're locking down the estate. Orders from Lord Everett. You're running out of time." The girl turned to leave, but Celeste grabbed her wrist. "You don't understand what you're up against," she warned. "This isn't just about a hidden birthright or royal secrets. If your truth comes out, it puts the queen herself in danger. There are people in that palace who would rather destroy the crown than let it fall into the wrong hands." The girl looked her dead in the eyes. "Then maybe the crown doesn't belong to them anymore." Behind them, footsteps approached fast. Security. Jacob reached for the side door, but it was jammed. They were cornered, and in that narrow, breathless moment, the question changed. It wasn't just who she really was. It was, how far would they go to keep the world from finding out? The hallway erupted in chaos as two palace guards rushed in, voices raised, demanding the girl step away. But before they could reach her, the queen herself appeared from behind them. "Stand down," she commanded firmly. The guards froze instantly. Silence fell like a blanket. All eyes turned to her. The queen walked slowly toward the girl, her expression unreadable. Her eyes, sharp, knowing, rested on the bracelet peeking from beneath the girl's sleeve. She took a deep breath, then spoke, the words that changed everything. "She is my niece," the queen said, "the daughter of my sister, Alina." Gasps echoed from the hall behind them. The queen rarely spoke of her late sister, and never publicly. Now, in one sentence, she confirmed what had only lived in whispers for decades. A royal child, hidden, away, erased to protect the monarchy from scandal. She was taken, the queen continued, voice lower now, more personal. For her safety, we said. But I knew the truth was messier than that. There were those inside the palace who didn't want her to exist. So we let them rewrite the story. We buried her name, and with it, her mother's legacy. The girl's eyes welled, but she held her ground. Then why now? Why let it come out? Because some secrets don't stay buried forever, the queen said. And I'm tired of protecting a lie. Behind them, Lord Everett stepped into view. He looked angry, cornered. This changes nothing, he snapped. There is no proof she is who she claims to be. The queen turned to him slowly. We kept one thing, she said. One thing no one could alter. From the folds of her cloak, she pulled out a sealed envelope. Inside was a DNA report, long hidden, long protected, confirming the girl's identity. She handed it to a nearby guard. Distribute copies to the press, tonight. Everett lunged, trying to snatch it, but Jacob blocked him, taking the blow instead. A brief scuffle followed before guards restrained Everett and dragged him away. Thai. Queen faced her niece again, tears now gently streaking her face. I failed you once. I won't fail you again. And just as the tension seemed to release, a new voice rang out from the corridor behind them. You're not the only one she left behind, the voice said. A young man stepped into view. Same eyes, same carved bracelet on his wrist. The room fell silent once more. The story wasn't over. It had just begun again. The hallway stood frozen, eyes shifting between the girl and the young man who had just stepped into view. He looked unsure, almost as surprised to be there as everyone else was to see him. But when he lifted his wrist and revealed the matching bracelet, the truth settled in like a quiet wave. He, too, was part of the story, another piece of a past, long kept in the shadows. The queen stepped forward, her voice softer now. What's your name? He cleared his throat. Elias, he said. I didn't know what the bracelet meant until recently. My mother told me bits and pieces before she passed, just enough to make me search. The girl looked at him, eyes filled with shock and something deeper. Recognition. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the queen simply said, Come with me. They followed her through the quiet corridors back to the private lounge. There, she shared everything. How Alina had fallen in love with someone outside of royalty, how the family feared scandal, and how the twins were separated at birth under pressure from those determined to protect the crown at any cost. Alina had tried to keep them, tried to fight, but her voice had been silenced far too soon. Elias had been raised across the sea, unaware of his sister's existence. The girl had grown up in a quiet town, never knowing the truth behind her origins. But now, standing together in the heart of the estate that once erased their names, they were finally seen. In the days that followed, headlines broke across the world. Hidden royals discovered. The Queen's secret niece and nephew. A new chapter for the crown. People were stunned, divided, but deeply captivated by the story of two lives stolen by secrecy and finally returned by truth. Lady. Celeste stepped back from the public eye, her family's ties to the old power structures exposed. Lord Everett faced charges for corruption and suppression of royal records. And Jacob? He was offered a permanent role in the palace archives, a quiet but powerful nod to the part he played in uncovering history. As for the twins, they didn't rush into titles or palaces. They took time, together, to understand who they were, not just as royalty, but as people. The girl, once called a nobody at the gala, now walked into every room with her head held high, not because of the crown, but because she had reclaimed her name, her truth, and her voice. And that was something no one could ever take from her again.